Those of us who've been advocating for a return to America's founding principles, the ones which built America from a colonial backwater to the world's greatest superpower in little over a century, have consistently cited the U.S. Constitution, which reflects those principles and has long been a model for people and nations seeking a sustainable and proven formula for freedom. But we also have to acknowledge that, like every other document crafted by mortals, it isn't perfect. The most obvious example of its imperfection was the failure to settle the issue of slavery. That didn't happen until 77 or so years later, and at the cost of hundreds of thousands of lives in the Civil War. But it was clear at the time that the Constitution could not be ratified unless that issue was postponed or deferred, and so it was. But if the founders had it to do again, there is at least one issue they might have handled differently, and that is term limits. The founders placed great faith in the American people and granted them a House of Representatives that would be subject to a popular vote every 2 years. The idea was that these biennial elections would prove sufficient to prevent the illegitimate accumulation of power. So no limits were placed on the number of years or terms a congressman, senator, or the president could serve. The 22nd Amendment, passed in 1951 in the wake of FDR's 4 election victories, finally limited the president to 2 terms, but no such limit has ever been placed on the House or Senate. And the result is that an overwhelming percentage of incumbents are always reelected. Even in watershed elections like 1994 and 2010, when many new members of the House were elected, over 90% of incumbents running for re-election were still victorious. This hardly seems to be what the founders envisioned for the People's House, the body of the national legislature designed to be most responsive to the needs of its constituents. Clearly, disproportionate power is vested in House members who've served for 15, 20, 30 years or more, likewise in the Senate. But things are entirely different with the presidency, since the 2-term limit was imposed, because the power inherent in the presidency immediately diminishes upon re-election when the president becomes, by definition, a lame duck. Barack Obama is no different than any of his 2-term predecessors. Now that he has suffered 2 straight big defeats, though, on the sequester and gun control, the president effectively has just one more chance to get traction or likely be diminished to the point of virtual insignificance on all matters pending before the legislature. That one chance is immigration reform. But if he fails to get that done, rest assured that he will be ignored by both chambers of Congress for the duration of his presidency. And even if he wins on immigration reform, he may still be entirely unable to push through any significant legislation on the issues that matter to him, such as increasing taxes, addressing climate change, and strengthening shaky legislative support for Obamacare. This doesn't mean Obama won't still try to make a big impact with action from the executive branch via executive orders and more regulations, but any new major legislation will be out of the question. So because of the term limits placed on the president, immigration reform may well be Obama's last big bite at the leftist apple, his last chance to dictate the agenda and forestall his constitutionally guaranteed descent into irrelevance.